Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Hearts of Iron 4 Dev Diary, today talking about Denmark's alternative history. In what might seem a change of pace from what we've seen from some previous Dev Diaries, a lot of what we get this week is mostly led by images and less so to do with text, so it's going to be more so open up to interpretation. Whether that's faster or shorter than usual, I'm not quite sure yet, but let's jump in and go find out. So the Dev Diary begins by giving us some context to some of the things we might expect in this week's Dev Diary, talking about how you're basically going to have to find alternative methods to deal with the Germans, which could include finding another party to help you, or just straight up allying yourself with them. Moving on from that, they go on to show some of the units and how they have changed. They actually have some new design for them, which is, I believe, based on an actual historical World War II soldier that fought in Denmark. And then finally, following on from that, we also get to look at the plane models. So we can see here the plane model for a Marine Jaeger and a Marine Bomber. Not much for me to say on that, but it's always good to see that they're keeping things up to date and unique for each of the countries. With that introductory preamble done, the Dev Diary begins with its first focus tree branch for alternative history. And that's going to be aligning yourself with your overlord. So, because Denmark is in, let's face it, a pretty weak position at the start of the game, economic crisis, weak military, etc., then you might just see the best alternative is to kowtow to the oppressor, which is most likely going to be Germany, and seeing if you can make the best of a bad situation. Looking here at the focus tree branch, we begin with a focus at the top that I most certainly am incapable of pronouncing, but you basically come with two options. You can either immediately seek independence, as in you take the annexation and become a puppet, but then work underground, creating a force to try and break free, procure allied weapons. Or on the other side, you can maybe, work alongside your current oppressor because it works within your advantage to maybe build up some of your industry with them, or even use it as an opportunity to go and create Scandinavia by securing the Norwegian coast, claiming Sweden, even going after Finland, I believe. Whichever side you go with, there is a shared branch which goes straight down the middle, which is to sanction sabotages and eventually work down the bottom to secure your Danish freedom. It's going to be interesting to find out how exactly contribute to the war effort is going to work, whether the ability for you to just declare on Sweden and Norway as a German puppet is going to enable you to create the formidable nation for Scandinavia, because as it stands right now, you cannot create the Scandinavia formidable nation if you are a puppet. So that could be dangerous if you want to do that. You might have to get independence to make the countries that you're annexing actually useful. In addition to that, if you do choose to kind of work alongside your oppressor, then at the bottom you can see petition for independence, meaning there may be a possibility for you to become independent from Germany in a non-independence war method. Rearming Denmark is our next section, and let's just see this as being the alternative democratic focus tree branch, the one where you don't gear yourself up for getting annexed by Germany and maybe take a bit more of a proactive approach in stopping the inevitable. With start the rearmament at the top, we can see there is a shared branch on the left called social stability, which will have you figure out what you want to do about the industry situation within your country, and that could be getting a research slot, but I'm not sure. But on the right we've got national unity, which is really going to be working about how are you going to defend yourself with seeking some protection, whether that's going to be ceding territory, trying to negotiate trade deals, or maybe even working with your neighbours to make a more proactive faction, which probably leads into the shared focus tree branch if you go down this path. So it's at this point in the Dev Diary that we get to start seeing some of the focuses that fall within this, starting with the shared branch down social stability, and how exactly we're going to be dealing with those industrial regulations that have been plaguing us. So here we see heavy industry regulations, which to my mind appears to be the best one, because as we stop here, we can see that you get minus 10% consumer goods factories factor off of Danish industrial capabilities, and also your resources to the market goes down. So in general, this seems like a much more sort of economic growth based focus, and I think is my favourite. Interestingly, they take note here that there is no communist focus tree path for Denmark, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there are not communist focuses for Denmark to take. So as we can see here, going down the democracy path, eventually if you choose to heavily regulate the industry, you can introduce the 5-year plan, which is exclusively only takeable for communists. This seems to involve getting some pretty decent buffs all across the board. The only sort of negative takeaway seems to be that plus 25 consumer goods factories factor, which is, let's face it, pretty intense, but getting 15% more factories in a state is kind of not at all fully, but is some alleviation for late game in that you can actually build more, thus you can achieve more, thus you will have less of a penalty from your consumer goods. But 25% is again pretty big. If you don't want to take the communist focus though, you do have limited social mobilization, which is the more democratic path, which gives you the stability, the war support, kind of similar to what we previously saw, but you lose out on the increased building slots that we saw earlier for not having to pay plus 15 consumer goods factor. As I said at the start of this dev diary, this is kind of interesting in that a lot of things seem to be based on just showing us the focus's content and then letting us figure out the pathing. And so at this point I might have showed you the focus tree as we saw earlier and where the next focus section is going to be about. So just down here under I think national unity, you can see there's a path that leads down to full social mobilization after you've mobilized the industry, the civilian economy, I think part of like the army with the little plane. And after that you come to full social mobilization. This is the third option of the types of mobilization we saw between the communist, the democratic, and now this somewhat more aggressive version as we see here. This one comes fast with the plus 30% recruitable population factor, so this one is really about putting out a huge war effort, but it does come with the consumer goods factory factor debuff of plus 20%. So this seems to be the middle ground between the two that we just saw. So as wonderful as all those focuses are for you to try and build up your industry, make sure that you've got the people on your side and you've got some nice buffs, none of these are actually impactful in terms of the diplomacy of your political nation. This is where the focus seek protection comes into its form, with you starting to open up decisions for you to try and alleviate some of the threats and maybe stick your hand out to some different countries to try and make friends and maybe even get them to not invade you or defend you in case you are invaded. I'm looking at you, Germany. You're the elephant in the room. So the seek protection focus at the top would lead us to believe that you open up to the Danish security decisions, where you have to decide if you want protection from Germany, Britain, the Soviet Union, or America. Logically following on from that, the focus below that, sign a non-aggression pact, would then have you take a decision to whether you want to, get a non-aggression pact with them until eventually you can maybe get them as a guarantor. That is to say, guarantee you to stop you being invaded. And finally, once you find yourself at the bottom of that little sub-branch, you get the big focus, and this is the big one, territory for protection. It even makes me uneasy thinking about it. So in this, you're going to have to give up some of your territory for that official guarantee. You've got the initial handout, you've got the non-aggression pact, but if you want to secure the guarantee, it has to be done with this focus. Each of the 4 nations you are going in with are going to want something. Now you do get 2 civs and 2 military factories in every event, regardless of which country you go for. But what territory you want to give up to get that guarantee changes. So for the United Kingdom, they want the Faroe Islands. I guess so they can add it to like the Orkney Islands and whatnot as some more islands to the north. The German Reich is coming after Sonderjylland, which is effectively the part of your country that borders them, which is going to make it even more difficult to hold your core territory against them. Keep in mind, of course, that Denmark, like many nations, have actually had all of their states reworked. So this isn't just like 2 states now, this is quite a few states. Also note how the name of Denmark keeps changing in each of these. Previously it was Denmark, now it's Daneveld. If you find yourself working with the Soviet Union, maybe you went for that communist focus, then you're going to be giving up Bornholm, which I believe is the small wholesome island to the east. And lastly, if you want to work with the United States of America, they're going after Greenland, which I think is something that, wasn't that something Donald Trump wanted? Like, wasn't that something he said? He's going to do a trade deal and get Greenland. Yeah, I don't think that one worked out for him, but maybe in this universe you can make it work out, and maybe get a guarantee in exchange. If, like me, you think that giving up all of your territory is super cringe, then you can take an alternative approach of, instead of looking for a guaranteer, maybe working towards some kind of faction or alliance. In that case, you're going to want to start off with the focus, strength in numbers. So, taking a look at the focus here, the key point is you're removing your declaration of neutrality, so because you're actively looking to join an alliance, which any aggressive nation to your south is probably not going to like unless you're seeking to join them. The very key thing to note though is the unlocks decision, seek an alliance. That is going to be the main way for you to be able to join or work towards forming a faction. Looking exactly at the decisions you have available to you, each of them will actually have some pretty big consequences depending on which one you go with. So at the top we see the main three factions, the Axis, the Allies and the Comintern. So I think they're going to be, it feels like they're more likely to be the standard just joining the faction focuses. In the case of, like, as we see here, joining Germany, there are the requirements such as German Reich being democratic if you're democratic, or in general you kind of have to be the same ideology as Germany, Britain, or the Comintern, Soviet Union, for you to be able to join their faction. Then below that, we see that we've got the kind of expected Nordic friends around you, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, and that will most likely open you up to the joint focus tree branch, which is the shared focus tree that we're getting in the new DLC. There's a dev diary about that if you haven't seen it. And then super strangely, there's a mysterious new option of France. I really thought that would be the United States, but it's France. So maybe the French Entente is going to be rearing its head in an alternative form. So I won't go down every single alternative version of the focus depending on which faction you go for, but note that joint military drills, which is a focus below it, can change the outcome of what you get from that. So with Britain you're getting stuff to do with the Navy, because they're big on Navy, as well as agility for the Royal Air Force, and military cooperation programs, which is the alternative focus, has buffs more geared towards the United Kingdom, again to do with ships and aircraft. For the Soviet Union, we're looking at stuff to do with artillery and infantry weapons. For Sweden, it's actually a great collective of things, including division defense on core territory and attack, so actually pretty good. And France is to do with armor and infantry. I'm surprised they didn't actually come with a buff to reduce your surrender limit. Maybe that's a bad joke. Note of course that it does say here that once you go with France, it creates a faction Nordic Cooperation Alliance. So you will become a faction leader as Denmark and France joins your faction. So you're probably going to have to be pretty quick on this if you want to make sure that they don't join the Allies before they join your faction. All that leaves to discuss now is the focus that we saw at the bottom, that being Nordic security. So Nordic security is going to find yourselves with securing the Northern Front, which is basically some decisions to invite Norway, Finland and Sweden into your faction to make sure that things are safe, you're stronger, and you can take on the Germans should they be the threat that you're most afraid of. What's interesting, however, is that should they decline and choose not to join your faction, you actually have a second decision that can appear, seen here with Protect the Swedish People, which straight up just allows you to declare war on anybody who says no. I am a fan of the fact that you can take this aggressive diplomatic action, where if people are not joining our faction, they're effectively the enemy. But it's such a dynamic shift in the game for people who have played democratic nations, and if people choose not to join your faction, oftentimes your game can be over, and this is just like a funny alternative way of dealing with it. I like it, I think it's good. Alright, I think we've heard enough about boring old faction making and democracy. Let's talk about what we're all here to talk about, monarchism. Following in the footsteps of what we saw with the Swedish focus tree, the Fash and monarchist paths are not too distant from one another, except on the other way around this time, in that they start by sharing a branch, but separate later on. As you work down from reaffirming neutrality, you'll have to unify the right to eventually decide who you're going to stick into power. Note that regardless of which side you go down, you're probably going to be boosting both sides, so make sure that one doesn't get too powerful to the one that you're not going to be going with. Going down the monarchist path, you might find yourself for konge og fatreland, sorry if said terribly, which allows you to start sticking in your family members into major positions. So Prince Frederick here can become your leader, chief of the navy, giving you naval experience gain and all those good buffs towards capital and screen. Following on from that, this particular monarchy is going to start working towards the industry of their country, making sure they're not a technological backwater, and that's mostly going to be coming in the form of making sure their fuel and resources are on point before working towards an economic mobilization strategy, which should give you some minus 25% consumer factory goods factor and plus 25% max factories in a state. This is a particularly good focus for monarchy, maybe fastly beating out what we saw with the alternative democratic tree. For the more eagle-eyed among you, you might notice that the king's branch, the king assumes power branch here, actually moves over to the west and is shared in this, as you can see here, a focus with different options, seek protection, which we saw with the alternative democratic branch. So that means that you can be monarchy and also seek to make an alliance with the United States or Britain or however so, or you can work towards trying to get the Nordic nations all under your control. We see here, though, of course, that strength in numbers and Scandinavian security are actually mutually exclusive. So Scandinavian security is exclusively for the monarchists. Scandinavian security seems to take a more semi-aggressive approach, I guess I have to say, about making sure that you've got everything secured in your region instead of particularly looking for allies. We see as we move further on that when you're trying to sway the people, as we saw what you could do on the other side, what you're really trying to do is boost monarchism, so support for unaligned, inside of those countries, so that eventually you can offer them some protection, which is just another way for puppeting them and making your little crown power overlordship even stronger. Below Scandinavian security is secure Swedish steel, which is a lot more of an old school focus in regards to how you could deal with it as a monarchy, which gives you an annex war goal against Sweden. Basically just take out Sweden. If, however, you decided to go with the boosting unaligned in that country and then making them a puppet, these focuses won't be about giving war goals, but instead about giving you decisions to integrate them into your country, so effectively just annex them through a decision. I think it's really good then that you've got the option, depending on how patient you want to be, what you want to do. You can take these focuses to annex Sweden and Norway and just get war goals on them, or you can be slower about it, boost on a line, ask them to become your puppet, and then take these focuses so that you can just annex your puppets. Both options are available for both playstyles. Should you find yourself controlling Sweden, which is a very powerful Sweden to own might I add, you'll have all of their steel. And with their steel, you can use it as a bargaining chip for those all so important guarantees we were talking about earlier. As we can see in this section called Offer Swedish Steel for Protection, you can try and give it to Germany, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, France or the US. In exchange, you might be able to get that guarantee and maybe avoid being warred on by Germany. I do wonder though, if Germany guarantees your independence, does that actually stop the AI from declaring on you? Because a guarantee doesn't stop a war, but a mutual guarantee does stop a war. Just something to consider. At the very bottom of the focus tree branch, which is shared between monarchism and fash, you have to decide how you want to go about your future conquests. So avenging 1864 will find you going to war with Germany, assuming they haven't gone to war with you first. Dominion Maris Baltica is to do with you securing the Baltic Sea, so that's going after Finland, and if you haven't already, and then going after the Baltic nations. So you can try and control that entire coastline. And then on the right we've got Danelagen, but that's only available to the fash path. The Danelaw is pretty old school. So, to wrap this dev diary up, we're going to talk about the fash options, which by the way were shared in half with the monarchist stuff, so it's not all new stuff, but they do have their own branch starting at the top with marching on the capital. After you've done that, you need to determine if you're going to seize power, which is the independent path, or ask for support, which is working with the German Reich, maybe leaning into the becoming a puppet focus tree branch that we saw at the beginning of this dev diary. With seize power, you get Lembic? I feel like we're missing a vowel in his name there. He's a militarist who gives you recruitable population, nothing to be scoffed at with a small nation like Denmark, actually just really good buffs across all the board. Once you've got K in power, you can take Denmark first, allowing you to create the faction, the Northern National Front, which doesn't sound dangerous at all. The Declaration of Neutrality is in the toilet, and you'll have to start inviting, most likely, your fellow Nordics into your faction in a similar theme to what we've seen with the other branches. If you don't want to take the independent path, you could try your luck with Fritz Clausen, who is a populist, giving you political power gain, the same recruitable population. Actually, so this guy's not too different than the previous guy that we saw. They're both pretty okay. But instead of making your own faction, this one is going to be about Denmark joining the Axis. Because of that, you will of course not have a focus following after, allowing you to make your own faction, but instead increase Dano-German cooperation, allowing you to maybe ask to get some more stuff and make you slightly stronger. Sorry if it's unusual that we're going through all of these images like this. I know it's not usually how we do dev diaries, but I did say at the beginning it's just a whole bunch of images this week. So regardless of which guy you went with, Axis or not Axis, you're going to have to rally the nation behind who you've chosen to hire. All in all, this country is gearing itself up for war, with war support going up, recruitable population factor going up, offensive war penalty stability modifier going up. Yeah, you really are preparing yourselves for conflict. As you are going about your conquest in the Nordics, going after Sweden and Norway and whatnot, you can try and institute corporatism, which is going to help you with your resources and making sure you're producing enough, as well as immediately improving your economic law up to early mob. Although, if I was already turned fash, I'd hope that I'd have the war support to be able to just go straight to war economy at this point. And to wrap off this week's dev diary, we finish it with the focus at the very bottom, Total Krieg, which is actually to do with you being like under attack, more than 50% surrender progress. So I guess this is if your wars have failed, because you realised you're Denmark, and maybe not as powerful as you once thought you were, but it does give you, for example, total mobilization, so a rapid production capability within your nation to really try and get things back on track. And with that wraps up this week's dev diary. So thank you very much for watching. Usually this is the point where I talk about the Danish focus tree and what we just saw. I don't really have too much to say because it's so similar to what we've seen with Sweden especially and Norway. I feel like all of these focus trees are actually quite similar because they all follow a similar feeling that they're working towards the joint focus tree, and thus they have a lot of overlap with one another, so they don't stray too insane. What I do want to briefly talk about though is Iceland. Have you noticed Iceland? Not mentioned explicitly, but keeps cropping up in very small places. I think it goes without saying that Iceland is an independent nation coming out in the new DLC. That's number one. Iceland independent in 1936. 2, they're going to be a puppet of Denmark. I don't think that's going to change. I wonder if they're going to use the personal union mechanic that they added in with Poland, because they were in a personal union. They weren't necessarily a puppet, but they were personal union. And lastly, what will be their focus tree? I'm assuming they're going to get a focus tree. If those small nations in Ethiopia were able to get focus trees, I'll be shocked if Iceland doesn't have one. But unfortunately, I do have some insider news, and that's that Iceland is not going to be having its own dev diary. So all of these questions are basically going to remain unanswered. We just don't know. Never mind, I suppose, but we're going to end it there because most likely next week is going to be ALT-History Finland. I hope I'll see you then. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, 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 bye.